All right, we're a go. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. This is day 2 of the Manila PTG, day 3 of the project teams gathering for the OpenStack community. And this morning, we probably have a smaller crowd because there's a lot going on elsewhere in the PTG. So we'll see if folks join us as we progress through the base topics. For your reference, the Etherpads are on the PTG website. I'm going to pull ours up right now. All right, and I'm going to start sharing that so we can use one place. Just give me a second while I set that up. All right, so you should be able to see an Etherpad that's shared. I think this is the planning one. Let me know if you can't see it. This is the PTG notes. Cool, you can see it. All right, so let's begin with day 3, really. Our session is on line 100 of this talk. We're going to talk about the manila-tempest plugin and what updates are supposed to be made or what are being planned for the Xena cycle. So I can introduce this topic, but we also have Vida and Leron on the call, and we've been over it. Just 3 of us before, and the kind of updates that we're looking for are have already started showing up on reviews and stuff. So we'll just take you through what pain points are there right now and what we're trying to resolve in the Xena cycle. So Leron's working on this change here, which says ditching testing for very old API versions. Leron, are you able to give an intro to this, or do you want me to?
Okay. You want to raise the possibility of stop supporting old version. I mean, version less than 2.24.
Mm-hmm.
Several reasons. Those versions are too old, and also this version does not behave like the new version. For example, it requires to add snapshot support in extra spec for creating the share. And also we can clean up some code, so it's always good. This is the main reason for deleting this version.
Makes sense. And there is an alternative thing, as we were talking about. So this surfaced about last week because we started doing, 1 second, let me actually add it to the right place. So we started working on this FFS driver impact, the changes that we made to this FFS driver and the impact on the other projects. Like you saw a discussion in the Manila channel as well this morning. So if a driver that did not support a particular feature starts supporting a feature in this next cycle, of course, our Tempest tests are not going to be doing the right thing there, because there are some Tempest configuration options that need to be toggled. So that's the background to this. Like, for example, Tom and I were chatting a little bit as well, because you could look at it as a regression, but it is really hard to reason how you can provide perfect backwards compatibility for a change like this. So with that in mind is what inspired these Tempest changes, at least. the one that Leron's driving, as well as the other implementation that I had. So the problem was when this FFS driver did not support snapshots or snapshot cloning, but then in the Wallaby cycle, it supports both of them. And it defaults to supporting both of them, and there is no way you can turn that off. So if you had a share type that was setting snapshot support equals false, or create share from snapshot support equals false, it can no longer be used to schedule shares to this FFS driver. So that you could think of that as a regression, but because of the way these are decoupled, it is hard to maintain backwards compatibility to something like that. So we just have at least a to-do item to go in and update the release notes and call out this as an upgrade impact, that in case there are deployments out there which have share types without with these extra specs set to false, that were somehow configured because that's what the capabilities that reported that were being reported by the this FFS driver, those share types will no longer work. And the fallout can be seen even in the Tempest tests. Part of the reason is we thought we can just go in and modify the configuration easily for each place where we're testing all of this stuff. And what is the configuration we need to modify? There are two options: capability snapshot support and capability create share from snapshot support. So we thought we could go there and set both of these to true in Wallaby and beyond. Except when we were trying to do that, we realized how complicated it was to do this in each individual project, and how to maintain branches for these things, because many a times these CI configuration projects, like for example InteropWG or even manila-tempest-plugin for that matter, the way we write these jobs is we create a job and we run it on all the branches, and we don't try to create a branch specific job unless it's absolutely required. And when you have to do a branch specific job, you got to play with some of these Zool smarts that are there, like adding job variants or making sure that the branch is invoking a specific job by name and stuff. And it might be inflexible in the way you do CI period. Like for example, InteropWG, I guess we were lost for a couple of days trying to understand how complex the job definitions for that particular place are. And I'm sure, I mean, if you're running FFS tests elsewhere, like we saw this morning with Cola Ansible or OpenStack Ansible, I think, you run into a similar issue because you now have to account for the driver supports a particular feature in one release, but it doesn't support it in the next release, or it starts supporting it in the next release and stuff. So to reduce the pain, it's not to solve the pain. To reduce the pain, we thought, can we at least take a look at all the tests where we're forcing setting these options when they're not even required? Like for example, you're trying to create a share. That's all you care about. You're not ever creating a snapshot of that share or creating a clone from a snapshot and stuff. So you don't really need these features. So, but why are we forcing these extra specs into these share types? That's what kicked off the discussion, and we started working on it in two different ways. One is we could remove support for 2.23 and below, and the reason that discussion started was because in version 2.23 and below, we in Manila require snapshot support extra spec to be set in share types. It's funny, it is, but it's a relic of the past, where we initially Manila had snapshot support as a mandatory feature, and then there were drivers that couldn't support it, so we started making it an optional feature. So right now, you know that Manila has a bunch of other capabilities like that, which are treated as optional features. And the way you use those optional features is for an administrator to set these features as extra specs and share types. So I mean, all of those things put together, we've carried across in manila-tempest-plugin. a way to, I have no idea why my Etherpad keeps disconnecting. It thinks it's open somewhere else. Let me see that. All right, it probably is. All right. So yeah, if we had, if we could stop making that assumption that it's a mandatory X respect, we should be good. Then we don't need to set it all the time. So which is why we're trying to drop support for 2.23. But then we start thinking about that a little bit more. What does dropping support for 2.23 even mean? Well, it means that we will stop testing lower micro versions right away. You cannot, I mean, and that is fine, I think, if you really think about it. But then if we stopped testing it, but the service still supports it, we're getting into a weird place there, because in the Manila service, we're not really removing support for that older micro version. We're not signaling it in any way. We're not saying 2.23 is a deprecated version. Anything below 2.23 is a deprecated version. And we also have the problem where right now we have deprecated V1, the whole V1 endpoint and the whole V1 API, but we still support it in a sense. So dropping support for 2.23 and below might actually be confusing to our end users, because if we do make a version incompatible change that affects these older versions, there is no way for us to test this stuff. So that was the discussion. We're having right now, and so I guess part of the problem is let's figure that out right now and say, okay, is this something we can make progress on? Can we drop support for 2.23 and below, and just say, Manila is going to also drop support parallelly, and signal that to our end users. That what that means is increasing the minimum micro version to 2.24 and making sure that the whole world's okay with that. And it's a hard decision to make. We knew this going into this whole micro version world about 5 years ago, that killing support to a micro version of the API is going to be a big change, and we never did it. And probably our customers are happy and thankful for that we have not really stopped supporting any of the micro versions or any of the API things. At the same time, the reason we've not done it is also because it's the cost to maintain older micro versions has surprisingly not been a lot. We've been responsible in adding tests every time a micro version change has been made, and maintaining those tests and never removing them. So you will see that if, let's say, if a micro version 2.7, for example, being modified to 2.8, we have always maintained tests for the 2.7 version. So it kind of goes against our principle of support if we start dropping this, and we'll have to then remove all of those tests as well. We'd have to raise the minimum micro version in Manila, and we'd have to make sure that there are no clients that are expecting older micro versions to work. That would be
so
what.
Gautam, let me interject a second. I just want to make sure I understand the motivation for dropping the support was that it would simplify our Tempest testing and make it easier to support across the different versions and make it easier to understand.
Pretty sure. Yep.
Okay.
That's pretty much.
And then the counter argument to that is, look, we've done a great job supporting micro versions before. It's not a big deal for us to continue to do that in the mainstream code.
Yep.
So why are we backing off on our principle that we support all the old micro versions just in order to
make testing easier,
make the tests work better? Isn't that like having the tail of a dog wag the dog rather than the dog wag its tail? The test infrastructure is driving changes to what we're going to support. So you are suggesting that we might have a way to satisfy both of those requirements, that we still continue to support the microversions, but also clarify and simplify the Tempest tests by a different approach than dropping old microversions. Do I have that right?
Yeah, you're right. And the approach specified is that, hey, look, don't expect our tests to work the same against a really old cloud. So for example, if you were running a cloud that relied on Okata today, and you use the latest manila-tempest plugin to run tests against Okata, then we will end up failing, because what we're trying to do here is removing these optional extra specs from the share types. But in your cloud, these aren't optional extra specs; these are mandatory extra specs, because your cloud's pretty old and it only supports version 2.23. So while we've made, like, all of these smarts into the Tempest plugin, we've maintained that backwards compatibility for older branch testing. So we're going to be violating that rule with this alternative. So we're still testing the older versions, but we're not going to support running this against an old cloud. Does that make sense, or am I like? It's kind of a conundrum and a very confusing thing. And I was trying to find what the support statement from Tempest itself is, and for stuff like RefStack and other things, for instance. And Tempest folks don't believe that you can really take Tempest and run it against any cloud. They tend to at least maintain 3 branches worth of testing, and they do that for RefStack purposes. It's great that manila-tempest plugin today works again more than 3 branches. You can point it even at a stable Queen's cloud, and it still works. I mean, as evidenced by our own CI jobs that we're maintaining.
Right. So I like that, because it makes the compromise in the right area, in my view, which is the microversioning still works, and it will work with old clouds. It's just that the Tempest, the test infrastructure for it isn't going to work with very old clouds.
Yes.
But it's not like we're actually breaking the microversion checking in the actual code.
Yeah, agreed. And that's what's, yeah, you're right in the sense that if this change is just going to make sure that share types are always created with whatever the maximum microversion is. And if your maximum microversion is 2.23, sorry, it's going to break everything. But if your maximum microversion is anything after 2.24, things will still continue to be working. You can still use this same Tempest plugin against stable Queen, stable Rocky, and beyond. It won't work against stable Okata. I think that's where the max microversion bump was made from 2.23. I can check.
So if anyone would object to this, it would be Interop people. If the Interop people said, but wait, Gotham, there are actually very old clouds out there that people run current Tempest against.
Yep.
And I don't think they're saying that, but I'm just covering. In other words, it's not going to impact our CI. We're not running Tempest against an Okata cloud.
Actually muted. I just checked. So this, I mean, you can create share types in Okata, because the max micro version is 2.32, which means that if you were running an Okada cloud, snapshot support's already optional. It's Newton where the max micro version is 2.22, which means that you can't, delete that extra spec. You have to always provide it and expect that it is set.
So someone with a Red Hat OSP 10,
yeah,
I'm just picking a concrete example that we would know, cloud would have Newton. And if they ran a current untagged Tempest against it, which could, theoretically be done, they would run into trouble. Our distribution, however, would, even though Tempest is branched, not branched, it would tag it and effectively do a downstream branch for OSP 10. So it's just hypothetical, but potentially some other distribution could theoretically run into that issue. It seems to me the odds are rather small.
Okay.
At that point, because even though Tempest is branchless and has the branchless philosophy, everybody I know actually pays attention to the tags with it, and does not expect, for example, they don't expect to be able to run Python 3 with an old cloud.
Yeah. You're right.
So in practice, people do pay attention to the tags with Tempest, even though it's not branched.
Yeah.
So I can support this approach. I mean, nothing's 100% perfect, but this seems better than saying that with current head of Tempest, we're going to throw away the old micro versions. Throw away is not the right word, but no longer support running against them. We will check the older micro versions, but with a current with more current clouds.
Agreed. Yeah. So what do you think about that, Liron? I mean, this patch is not complete yet. I just put a -1 on it myself because this morning we were told that the scenario tests are failing. Oh, cool. So you're actually uploading patches to that. So you agree with this approach then?
Yes, we still, it's okay to leave the support. I'm okay with that. Just possibility. Well, maybe it will, it can motivate customer to use the new micro version. I don't know.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, since we're not making a hard stance on, I mean, I don't think we've ever said anywhere, not even in the manila-tempest-plugin documentation, that this can really be used against all branches of OpenStack Manila. And since we don't support stable Newton ourselves upstream, when we should probably not worry about it. And if somebody is motivated to fix this issue and they're using the latest Tempest plugin against a really old version, then they'll speak up, I think. At least it differs that bigger decision of saying, can we drop support for everything before? That's a much bigger discussion, and for a change like this, I don't think we need to have that discussion.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree that if we support less than 2 to 4 micro version, we need to test. Yes, for sure. If we given the support. So yes, maybe we need to leave it as it is and still test this version.
Awesome. Yeah, let's do that. Cool. So this took up like all of the time that we had set aside for this. Is there something that you think, Liron, Vida, that we can catch up on right here? We can eat into the next session a little bit, but is there something important that you want to this thing, or we can defer the rest of the topics to later today or maybe during one of the weekly meetings. What do you think?
Yeah, Gotham, I think we covered the gist of it. We can talk about the rest later. Thank you.
Makes sense.
Excellent.
Awesome. Okay, so we didn't speak about this. I'll take some notes later. And let's move on. I said we take a 5-minute break. So let's do that right now. Let's come back in 5 minutes. So it's 14:31 right now. So let's try to begin at 14:35. So that's less than 5 minutes. All right. Thanks, everyone. See you in 4 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. So let's get started. So I put another Etherpad link next to this topic. This is, we're going to be talking about service recovery. So, and please follow that link on the service recovery page. Great. So yeah, let's start talking about this one. So we've broached this subject here before, and so this is concerning the Manila share active support. So let's try to rehash some of the discussions that we've had in the past. We're and actually focus on a couple of important problems that we identified in the past. And for this particular session this morning, we're going to talk about the service recovery aspect, and about in about half hour when we get to the next part of this topic, it's going to be about polling operations. So what's the issue here? Well, if you wanted to run multiple copies of the Manila share service today, you would run into some issues, and we have not fixed fix these issues, and we have actually piled on multiple things on top of these issues. So we've exacerbated the problem over the last few cycles. And it's now time to spend some attention on this, because there are some use cases for you to run Manila share in an active fashion. And a primary driver for us, at least at Red Hat, has been that there is a proposal to do a kind of architecture with our deployment, where you can use each of these OpenStack services at a small footprint edge site. And if should you be running at this edge site, you really don't have the luxury of having a some sort of a service HA mechanism like pacemaker, which can allow you to run in an active passive fashion. So if it would be nice for all of these services to be running in an active manner natively, so that we don't have to resort to anything and have a dependency on the service like pacemaker.
And Gautam, if I can just add, this is of course important to Red Hatters for the reason Gautam mentioned, but it actually is also quite important to non-OOO, non-Red Hat type deployments, because they typically don't have the kind of pacemaker machinery that we have spent years developing and integrating with our deployment tools. So from an upstream Manila perspective, having active share service could really help with HA and other kinds of deployments like Cola or OpenStack Ansible and Canonical and stuff like that. Sorry for the parenthetical
Nope, nope.
remark, but I'm
No,
just
feel free
adding.
to interrupt me at any time, because this has got to be a really, it's a topic we've spoken about before, but we've really got to rejig our memories, and also acknowledge new use cases as they come along. Because at this point it's become tech debt that we've not solved this issue, and it's going to prevent usage of Manila in some of these newer architectures, because we have not addressed some of these pitfalls and stuff. So I'd absolutely be interested to create like a use cases section, which I think I'll take to the specs. And so if you have any use cases that absolutely require the Manila share service to be active, feel free to put it in there. Even if it's a nice to have thing, feel free to add it to that section, and I'll carry it forward. But I think everybody in this group kind of understands where some of those use cases are. And we've highlighted the whole edge deployment, the ease of deployment, etc. I think some of the other use cases are going to be, if you were to run OpenStack on top of Kubernetes, etc. You have some ways to take advantage of HA natively, and so this allows you to actually have a easier deployment strategy with Kubernetes, rather than imposing a particular kind of deployment. Like I know folks that create a deployment style specifically for Manila share, so they don't have to run into this active issue, or they don't have to run the service active. So that's the current situation. Let's quickly dive in. So if you wanted to run that.
Gautam, okay, sorry for stopping you. A question.
Mm-hmm.
When you say they don't need to run the deployment in this configuration, is that because we will be through Kubernetes that they would handle the existence of a single instance at all times and
yeah, exactly.
restart? Okay, understood. Thanks.
So they basically bend over backwards to try to make just one active service at a time, and make sure that it's not there are no two services that are listening on the same RPC port, etc. Only to prevent these problems that we're going to highlight below. So yeah, let's talk about how things can be set up active right now, and this is one way to do that. That's the configuration example on lines 20 and beyond. So with this, you can, this is pretty much how most services in OpenStack can operate. There are some variables like a configuration option like host, and the topic that particular service is supposed to be listening within, and you can set that topic. We set everything to Manila share, and you set the same host name on different nodes. You now have two services that can manage the same set of backends, but they're now operating in an active fashion. Although, this is problematic to some reasons, and the main of which is that there is no way you can tell these services apart should you configure them like this. And we kind of do that a little bit in InteropWG, for instance, because we kind of move the service across our controllers when failures occur. And so we set the same host name across our controllers so that we can easily bring up the service on whatever controller that we want. We're still not running more than one of these, but if you choose to do that in a deployment, it's possible, but you'll run into the HA problems that we're going to talk about. So why do you need to identify the individual services? Well, you need to know what's the health of a individual service at any given point of time. And maybe there is something you can build on top to do health checks, but nothing that Manila provides solves that problem for you. If you have multiple hosts that are pretending to be the same host, in the Manila service will obfuscate that detail, and it's going to gladly consider all of the hosts to be the same exact host for its purposes. So you can't, there's no visibility from at least Manila for you to tell these different services apart. So what's the solution that we were thinking about in the past? So we had the last time we had this discussion, we had Gorka join us from the Cinder team and take us through the solution that Cinder had. And we brainstormed a bit around that. So I wanted to rehash some of that. So we would introduce a concept of clustering these hosts. It is, I think, a really well thought out solution, at least as far as a process like Cinder volume or Manila share is concerned. So we would let you, the administrator, define a cluster in the configuration, and you could then use multiple services can rely on this cluster configuration, and if you have the same cluster, that's how we would be able to tell multiple hosts are now the same as far as our scheduling, provisioning, and all of the other practical purposes are concerned. And using this cluster concept, we could then expose it out via the Manila API, because now you have the same host name. You can have different host names, sorry. But since you have the same cluster, we would now let you see via an API, perhaps, that for you to list the different clusters that are there in your cloud as they come up dynamically, because this is decoupled. And you can also see what the health of these clusters are. Pretty much the same workflow that you're currently seeing with hosts and services. It's going to be a similar experience with clusters. You should be able to view them. You should be able to enable or disable clusters of hosts. What sort of an impact is it on the resources themselves? I think this is again something we spoke about in the last time. We could handle this in two ways. And the resources we're talking about are shares, snapshots, anything that are tied to a particular host today, replicas, share groups, etc. So you can name any resources that Manila manages that is currently tied to a given host today. We need to map them to a cluster. And we could do that in one of two ways. We could perform a database upgrade and permanently store the cluster identity into the database, kind of what we do with the hosts. But we know some pitfalls to that approach, which is that should you want to change something, you'll have to go mess with the database. And we can make that possible as via the Manila managed tooling that we do. Today, you can actually replace your host names that way. So we could make that possible with the cluster as well. So if that is one approach, but the second approach that Cinder does, for instance, is that during service start time, it looks for resources that don't have a cluster identification. It then goes and updates the database and sets the cluster identification. And this can give you two further possibilities. A, you can dynamically reconfigure your clusters. So if we remove the limitation of saying, let's look for resources that don't have a cluster identification, we said, let's just look for all resources and then reset their cluster identification. That's now possible. Like if somebody went in and changed the cluster name, we would just update all this resources as part of the service startup to this new cluster. So there's upsides and downsides to both these approaches, and I wanted to consider both of these and put them down in a spec, but I'm just introducing them to you. Any thoughts on doing one or the other? It's a minor detail that we can even take to the specification.
What is quickly though, what is the downside of doing it dynamically the way Cinder is?
Well, the downside is making sure that when you're doing startups, you're not doing this service, the clustering, or rather, the claiming of these resources multiple times. So assume that you have 2 or 3 hosts in a cluster, and all of them are come up at the same time. You don't want all of them to claim or make these database upgrades spuriously. So if you are able to handle that piece, which is through some sort of coordination, which we'll get to, there is really no downside. It eases our administrative burden that you don't need any Manila managed tooling to go set.
Yeah, I'm a little biased to doing it via the same design pattern they're using, because other things being equal, that means you have more brain share, as it were, to apply to the problem. If there's a problem with the coordination, then you solve it, and you've solved it for 2 different projects.
Exactly.
You know, but we don't need to go into it in detail right now. I just wanted quickly to understand. So there might be some complexity and coordination requirements there, whereas just a manila manage approach could be simpler to implement.
Exactly. Yeah, it would be
Okay.
simpler, but then we also have the coordination issues with other things, as you'll see, as I speak about them.
Yes. Okay.
So
Thanks.
if we solve this problem, maybe it's not that big a problem to just add this as well to the coordination part. So let's talk service recovery. So there are specifically 2 big problems with that we want to address in the upcoming cycle. And I'm going to be talking about the service recovery piece. We're going to be chatting with Xena about the polling aspect. So these 2 things have been the biggest roadblocks to doing active. There are other concerns, such as individual drivers having critical sections, and today those critical sections are guarded by local file locks, and there shouldn't be way too many of those critical sections. But I mean, as we know, I mean, in production there are quite a few things that you will want to synchronize and stuff. And you know, we do some of that in the FFS driver. We do some of that in the other first party drivers. I mean, I think I know the NetApp driver does some synchronization with respect to creating and deleting of meta resources like share servers, etc. Things that you would want to fence off, you know, from other players in the same space, kind of thing. So all of those, there is at least a short-term solution of replacing these local file locks with the distributed locking system. This is already available in Manila, except you know, we've got to go do this job. We've got to go you know, replace each individual lock with the tools locks. And the reason it's not been done so far is because we wanted vendors to actually go back and audit their critical sections and see whether those critical sections still make sense. But that's the third issue, and I want to spend less time on this, but still talk about it in case you are maintaining a driver today. You know, since this is available to you, you can get started on this effort to replace your local file locks with tools. And deployers have been using tools with other services, namely Cinder, including Manila. There are file locks today that are being serviced via tools. So I mean, the substrate's there, is all I'm saying about that. So let's get deep into the first problem, service recovery. What is service recovery? Well, when something goes down in your cloud, the Manila share service goes down in the cloud after it has consumed some resources and it and consumed some messages, and it's about to be doing some job, but it dies in the middle of doing that job. When it comes back up, it needs to know what needs to happen with those things that were in flight. Today, there is very little amount of service recovery that is automatically handled for you, and it's in a bad state. We have quite some bugs against this, such as, for example, you have a share that's being created, and the node that's creating the share goes down. And when it comes back up, it ignores that because the message is gone from the message queues, and the share will be stuck in creating state. And one way of fixing that problem, we thought, was when the service comes back up, it can just set that share to error and allow, you know, users to reattempt creation. So that was the kind of thoughts that we had before. But I wanted to list down the others in process and transit kind of things that could possibly be affected, that would all need a similar or common approach to recover. And they're down in the notes you could think of shares being created, being deleted, being managed, access rules being applied, and replicas being created, share groups being created, deleted, etc. So any resource that is in a transitional state is what a service that's gone down and coming back up needs to be cleaning up for. So once you have a concept of the cluster, so how would we solve this issue? Well, we would associate all these services to a given cluster that happens at the cluster start time or via the database upgrade, as we discussed. So whatever way we do it, the resources are known to the cluster. We would then have the cluster claim a reader writer lock on the database. The cluster would say, and this would be where we put it in the database still, it's up for debate and discussion, but we'd let the database know that this worker on this particular cluster is going to perform the cleanup. And what that cleanup involves is to take these resources and that are in transitional states and figure out what to do with each individual transitional state. There are some transitional states that can be reattempted. We have made deletions idempotent. So if you have access rule deletions, replica deletions, share deletions, group deletions, etc., any kind of deletion, that operation can definitely be retried because no driver should be failing on deletions. So that's an easier problem. So all of the deletions can easily be accounted for. So that the service that acquires the reader writer lock can go in and spawn these deletion tasks. And is you could ask the question, what happens when that while it's deleting the service dies again. We'll come to that in just a second. But I wanted to go through the other operations that we would have to consider that are not considered idempotent. So we have an issue with any of the create ops because we've not made a contract to the shared drivers that these operations had to be idempotent. So some shared drivers that I was looking at this morning have some notes in there that say that you can call create share any number of times with the same parameters, and as long as you have the same ID, it's going to be an idempotent operation. And this is stuff like this FFS driver. But if you were to look at any of the other drivers, including the reference drivers, if you were trying to create a share with the generic driver, we go ahead and create a Cinder volume, and Cinder is going to raise an error if a volume already exists with the same ID. So we basically disallow you to recreate a share in a sense. So we have logic in there that basically today raises an error. So that's the sort of thing that can't be taken for granted as, it can we reattempt this? Probably not. There's way too many shared drivers that have made this assumption that these are not, repeatable actions. So that's the part to fix should we want to, make share creations retriable. But what can we do in the meanwhile? Can we set them to error? That's one possibility. We can, and setting them to error is way better than leaving them in a creating state, because having a share go to error is annoying to an end user, but they can repeat their entire workflow themselves by reissuing the API call to create the share.
And Gautam, we could even take a middle ground there. I would say set them to error first as first pass, but you could have potentially some kind of backend capability of that it is idempotent, and in which case you would not have to set them to error without requiring every backend to implement that first. But that I would just say set them to error first. That's very reasonable.
Awesome. Yep. So that's what I was going to come to next. How do we identify and make progress on this? So exactly what you said, Tom, that this could be a great first approach, which is it's better than what we're doing today. If there is a service failure, you at least have the notification that this is going to be in an error state, and you can take some action for it. And we could even hand it over with user messages saying this is a retriable action. Please go ahead and recreate the share and clean up the old share sorts. And I'll just take that this thing. So the other approach that we would is exactly what Tom said, which is if we were to make progress on this, we can start imposing a new contract onto the drivers. And like anything that we ask driver vendors to do, we would provide a backwards compatible way of doing that. And the backwards compatibility is just this: we would declare a set of idempotent operations that drivers can support. So if you are a driver author or a driver maintainer, you can go in, audit your create share, create replica, create group, create access rule, etc. All of those create methods, and flag them as being idempotent. And if the drivers, if the share manager service has this visibility, it can then go ahead and retry the create operations only on if the driver claims that operation is idempotent. So that's one way we could handle the futures. And it is definitely in vendor driver interest to do this, because otherwise the UX is a little less desirable. Any thoughts on that?
Just that I should have read ahead before I talked. And then I suppose there's also the possibility that some possibility of auto cleanup of resources. If you think about like the generic driver, it would be quite complicated. But conceivably, some drivers might say, "Oh well, you let me know, and I'll clean up everything I was doing partway along the way and undo those things." I don't know, but it's a nicety we can think about down the road. I would say start with error. Ideally, people could do then develop their own idempotent capabilities, and maybe if they can auto clean up, they can do idempotent anyway by auto cleaning up underneath the covers and allowing idempotent. I'm just thinking about it, but
makes sense.
I think there's great structure, Gotham. The important thing is to get started with putting them in error state rather than leaving them in the ing state.
Exactly. So as we're saying, we'll do the cleanups for those that we already know are idempotent. We will set the others to error to begin with, and then make progress by saying, selectively unlock these features for each individual driver. And there's, yes, it would still be better UX if everybody upgraded at the same time, but all these things go with the drivers. Did want to spend a little time to explain how this is different from ensure shares. So right now we have on service startup, we call ensure share. So this is a operation where we want to understand if there are some export changes that have happened on the back end. And this was, it's not really a service cleanup sort of an issue. Not at least for drivers that talk to storage systems that are not part of OpenStack, right? Like, for example, you have a vendor driver storage, let's say an external Ceph cluster, and it's not running in any HCI fashion or something that the service failure means that the storage has gone down as well. So there was no need for us to do ensure shares just at startup. So we kind of decided to split out that ensure shares and make it its own thing. So at driver startup, it was one place that backend drivers could let Manila know that it would have to look into its database and give all of the export locations and exports to the driver so that it can go in and do some accounting. Are these shares still around? What is the health of these shares? Has there been any export changes that I need to record back into Manila? So this is still the mechanism going forward. Ensure shares will still happen in the same exact way as it does. It will, except that in a clustered world, ensure shares will also be something which the a particular host driver will acquire a read or write a lock for from the database to perform. So we'll just ensure that ensure shares is only occurring one time, no matter how many services that you have in the cluster. So that's the thing on that. I can't think of anything else that we currently have like an issue with at this moment. All of this work will involve multiple components. It will involve multiple database changes. There is an upgrade impact here, which is that should somebody want to start using this, it is only going to be available in newer versions of Manila. There is no way we can backport these because of the database changes that are involved. And yeah, pretty much that. I think. Yep.
Hey, sorry, a question regarding the last point. So you said no way we can backport, but it's also not possible to upgrade from one scenario to another, right? I mean, if you have a newer version which potentially could be deployed this way, but you're upgrading from an older version, would the database migrations be sufficient to allow you to change the deployment model? Or
I think so. So I mean, there's one way we could do this completely in memory, like the way we currently do service accounting. I mean, all of that, we have database tables to just go put in, just as a new service shows up, we put its details into the database on the fly. But to account for newer identity of the service itself at this point, which is having a cluster ID or some sort of way to distinguish between different clusters, and for these clusters to be able to talk to the database and do, set a lock, for instance, those would require net new tables in the database. So that's why the database upgrade. And
okay, but
we've so far not, I mean, we've not backported any database upgrades.
No, I understand that. Sorry, what I meant was in the process of upgrading OSP. So going from a version of Manila which didn't have this to a version which does have this feature.
Yep.
Would you be able to change the deployment scenario, or what was deployed and managed via the old method, kind of cannot really be adopted by the cluster definition?
That's actually a great question. So right now, if you had a deployment that didn't use clustering, but you had active share service, is that what you're saying?
Or active passive, like the way which you were showing earlier, where we have the same host set across multiple nodes, but we always run one instance at a time.
Yeah.
So suppose you come from that scenario, yeah.
So if you didn't have a cluster set, we would, I mean, all of this would still behave like you didn't do any clustering. So all of this is ignored. And if there is no cluster configuration option, there's no need for us to coordinate any service startup. So we would assume that things were as normal. We wouldn't acquire any locks. We would just kick off service cleanups and rely on the fact that deployments are not are not starting and stopping services at the same time. If they had deployed it in this particular way, let's say if in a rel OSP, we would rely on the fact that it's always going to be running active passive in such a situation.
Okay, so you wouldn't really be able to migrate to the newer model. you can do new deployments which are configured in the newer model, but you wouldn't easily be able to migrate existing deployments to the newer model.
I think you could, right? You would just, I mean, before you started an upgrade, you could, I mean, or even after the upgrade, you could configure the cluster and you would have to restart the services. I don't think there's anything preventing us from, I mean, if the code's upgraded and we have access to the database objects that we need, nothing's preventing us from retrofitting clusters into an existing deployment.
Okay, so I misunderstood that. Okay, so you could, understand. Thank you.
So technically today, let's say you have an active passive deployment, just like OSP, you have 3 controllers, you're running just one Manila share at a time, and you're using Pacemaker. Even if you want to use clusters, you can continue to do active passive if you wanted and configure clusters, but I don't know why you could then actually drop the Pacemaker there and bring up 3 Manila share services.
Okay. Yeah, that was what I was thinking about, the scenario in which you are upgrading from a pre-existing deployment to the newer version. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, so we will continue supporting the older method of deployment because I mean that's kind of what we test with upstream anyway right now, and we're not going to remove testing for that, which is running one copy of each service, and we do quite a bit of testing with that. I did want to ask about one other thing. So right now, I think we kind of added multi backend after the whole service. I mean, multi backend was always done as a hack, right? And I don't want to call it a hack. It sounds probably offensive. I meant that the way we do multi-backend, we kind of allow operators to set multiple backend sections in the same configuration file, but there are some options that you have to configure across all of the backends in that given configuration file. This is an inflexible requirement, like for example, the host field, and it's you could theoretically think of a cluster in the same exact way. So if you wanted to have multiple clusters in your deployment, I was thinking we'd just begin with putting cluster right alongside host. So you cannot override the cluster inside your backend sections. And if you really did want to override the cluster, you would ideally have a different configuration file. Because I mean, it kind of changes the whole meaning of this. We treat hosts and clusters at the service level, and we enable backends at a service level. So you can't really have multiple hosts or multiple clusters configured on the same config file. We could make things possible that way. It's not too hard for us to code it that way, but it kind of percolates a wrong message in my view, that to make configuration easier for deployment tooling and stuff, we're okay with overloading these services onto one place, which does happen. Like we've never tested the scalability of the Manila share service should it be running 20 backends. We don't think it's ideal for you to configure 20 backends, for instance. I mean, we've at max probably tested a handful of backends configured with a given a single service. So that assumption will continue, and that's what I've added on lines 58 through 62. Does anyone have any thoughts about that? So think of it this way, that in this new world with a cluster, you will have host and cluster defined in the default section. You could have one or more backends in that same configuration file. These backends are each treated their own separate share process. So they're in a cluster, but the entire cluster definition is going to be cluster and backend. So you're effectively getting multiple clusters with the same config file, but that's because we support multiple backends in the same config file.
Oh.
But ideally, you should have multiple configuration files and separate these services so that you can scale the services themselves, rather than relying on, the way we do this, multi-backend is we just spawn a new process. So you'll have multiple Python processes running inside a Manila share service.
So the problem you're describing, Gautam, would really apply to any project with the same kind of architecture,
Yep.
with multi-backend, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
And has Cinder considered the issue? Do you know?
I actually don't know, and it's been a while since.
I mean, they've got a couple of pretty smart people over there, although they're not as smart as the Manila developers. I'm joking, but I wonder if we should talk about this with Gorka and probably Alan from the deployment side or something like that. I think it's a great. I don't like that it's a problem, but it's a great problem. I mean, you framed it really well.
Yeah, I agree, and I'd love to get feedback from Julio, John here as well, because I'm sure I mean, it's always been done so, at least in OO. Multi-backend's been easy to support because the services did it this way. It was easier for the configuration pooling. And with DCN, I think now you could separate the backends, but still you could actually overload and do multi-backend even at each individual site, I think, and mix your backends that way.
Hey, got him. Hey, I'm trying to, I think for Cinder, they have this very same problem. You have to list the stanza in the default section. And then the cluster is probably defined at the backend level though. But yeah, I'm not, is that probably what's suggested in the header pod on the line saying we could have the backend cluster. We could allow line 60. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think Cinder also has this support for a backend cluster. And I think it's for very similar reasons. That, adding that would not be too hard. And allowing overriding that is not going to be too hard, except I think it'll continue that practice that deployers might choose to just deploy one service because it's easier. But having one service and multiple backends is never scalable. You can already see that with, as you increase the number of backends, the number of processes that are going to be overloaded in that service is going to be more. It scales per backend. So let's say you're running the Manila share is in a container, you're better off having one backend per container rather than having X number of backends in a given container. But yeah, like I've said, I mean, I'm not aware of the deployment challenges that go alongside this. And I mean, because this is supported by, this flexibility is offered by both Cinder and Manila, I think deployers have a choice of how they can do this. It's just a call out, I think, saying, it won't scale. We don't expect it to scale. And so we need a solution for that, which is run one backend per service. But just wanted to call that out. I will be adding that in the spec as well. Yep, but I keep saying that I think the action items from my end over here would be that I'd be writing this up into a spec and providing some more details, like what is the schema of the database changes that are going to be made, the API changes that are going to come along. And if you have specific questions for me that you would like for me to include, please go ahead and type them out in the Etherpad. And I'm really hoping to get reviewers taking a look at it. I'll add the folks from Cinder who've done this work in Cinder. And if you are a driver maintainer, here's an opportunity for you to actually get involved in the design from the get-go as well. Any questions, concerns, comments? Switch back to this. All right, we're running late by about 20 minutes, but we'll still take a 5-minute break over here if that's all right with everyone, and get to the second part of this where Xena had some ideas around periodic tasks, and I want to give him, given this context, it would be easier to talk about polling operations and other issue with active services. So is everybody fine with the 5-minute break?
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. See you in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Gotham,
Thank you.
for covering that.
Hello. And welcome back. Just checking if I'm all right. Recording's good and running. All right, thanks everyone. Welcome back. We're going to start off with polling operations in the Manila Share Manager service. Xena, we can use the same Etherpad if you want, or we can continue to take notes in this Etherpad. But I had some polling notes as well in the other Etherpad. Do you prefer one over the other? I probably will have to type this out. Let's actually switch over to this Etherpad because anyway we were using that. So I'll put Xena's thoughts over there. Hey Xena.
This is I found in Apache Xena is changes the way of to control the product tasks. Now the Manila is use loop use all the loop calling, and I found Sender it uses the thread group, it a function of self there. I don't know how to say it.
No, absolutely. Feel free to type it if you want, and I can provide some of this thing. I haven't seen this thread group implementation in Cinder. Do you have you linked us to the API doc on that?
In this we can find a function is add timer in the add timer we will find the add timer will call loop calling.
I see. You could actually cancel it.
I write something.
Sure. I see. So this has a way to add timers. Okay. Add timer arcs. Okay, cool. So you could start off a thread group and at some point add timer arcs to the thread group so that it can then call itself at regular intervals. Interesting. It seems like it's going to use the looping call itself, but but this thread group provides you a good API to start, stop, wait, from what I can see, or even cancel the thread, which is pretty cool because that was one of the bigger reasons for us to do some funny things with looping calls. Yeah, we do have a stop and wait in looping calls, but we don't have a way to, like, you know, cancel a looping call. It's kind of static. So you will see for example, I think with the share usage tracking, you will see a message up top when the service is initialized saying that share usage tracking is not required, so it's not going to spawn a looping call. But what it's actually doing is it's spawning a looping call that just keeps returning immediately, because there's no way for us to cancel that looping call, which is statically invoked in code. So this is actually a pretty good find. Thanks, Xena. Does we not need to go through self.timers in the code. Great. Awesome. All of this is great. So so your thought is that will you be working on this in the Xena cycle? And do you want to, like, take our existing looping calls and convert them into this thread group approach? Awesome. I'll let him know. Absolutely. I know. I apologize for that. So I asked you a couple of questions on the Etherpad. So we can chat over that.
Yes, I will make a patch to restore this, to add a thread group into Manila in X version.
Awesome. I can think of only one thing, which is canceling, but are there more advantages to this that you know of? If there are, please let add on to this. Any other thoughts, concerns from anybody else around this? I think this is a pretty cool, straightforward change. We would just be updating the API around our current polling to use this new thread group logic. Awesome. All right. So let's. Xena, did you have anything else besides this?
No, today that's all.
Okay. Thank you. Awesome. So yeah, definitely wanted to cover that as part of this. So with this this change that Xena's planning to do should not affect our active work. The second part of active is fixing problems for active is long running polling operations, and we have a lot of them in Manila. We poll for the consumed space. We polled for service capabilities. We polled for backend capabilities, that is. And we also polled for certain resource states like health checks and things that we do for health checks around share replication, around share replica snapshot creation, creating a share asynchronously from a snapshot. Like for example, if you're using this FFS driver, that's what's going to happen. If you create a share from a snapshot, you're not going to get a share immediately. It's going to get take some time for this snapshot clone to actually materialize. So instead of blocking on the driver's thread, we go ahead and ask the driver a bunch of times if that share is ready for consumption. So these polling operations, should you have multiple share services at the same time, can be very can be disruptive. The thought is that most of these polling operations are read-only, that there is nothing that's going to be modified in the backend as part of a poll. But then even when you have read-only operations, it's best if we could have just one poll running at a given time. If you have multiple of them, you're just wasting threads doing the same exact work. You're duplicating the effort. So the solution around that also revolves around clustering. So whatever we use, whether we use a fixed interval looping call or a thread group, we could direct the polling task against a cluster, and what we do is we at that fixed interval we wake up, we create an RPC call directed at the cluster, and any member of the cluster can pick up that RPC call and perform that operation. And if there is somebody that's already looking at something at a given polling interval, the rest of the services can just ignore that polling interval and move on. So that's the thought around these polling improvements. It's a lot like the cleanup improvement, except that this is also going to be coordinated via acquiring a log from the database, making sure that there's only one service that creates these polling tasks, these health check tasks, and distributes these health check tasks onto the message queue, which ensures the same kind of fair distribution that that the rest of the provisioning operations are going through. I pretty much ran through that, but I think that we covered much of this in the in the other discussion we had around service recovery. We do very minimal polling things, so adding this onto the same clustered approach should not be that big of a concern. And we are deliberate about introducing new polling operations. Although over time we've added replication, migration, asynchronous share creation, etc. And migration includes shares and share servers. So wherever we're performing these health checks, we would switch from just ensuring resources right then and there to going back through a fair queue by putting in a RPC request to the share service and allowing other workers in the cluster to also perform these operations. If you didn't have other workers, this message would just come back to you, and another thread in the shared driver is going to pick up and perform that operation. Does that make sense? Like, any concerns with that?
Can you elaborate on what is the line there? Much of this problem domain is common with sender volume except the issue of polling. Did you explain that and I missed it?
Just that. Oh, okay.
Oh, that was
I think this is a little
earlier,
out
I
of
guess.
context. I think
Yeah,
this.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just got confused by that. I was.
Yeah, let me remove that line. And
Okay.
I think, yeah, it was a little out of context to say that, we had two things, which is recovery and polling. And polling is basically something that Manila does that Cinder does not. Cinder does not have health checks on long running tasks, at least not the way that Manila does.
Okay, that was the point of that. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, we have Arkady here, and he's waiting to talk to us about the Interop working group and the work that we have set out for Xena. So I don't want to take over too much of his time. It's already 5 minutes past. Are there any questions, concerns that we need to bring up right now regarding either service recovery or polling? Great. If not, I would just take another couple of seconds to do a team photograph if you're fine with it. If you would turn on your cameras, I could take a screenshot. This is for the foundation. They like to share pictures at the end of the day. There's Tom, if you've not seen him before. Hi, Arkady.
Sure, happy to do that. Hi, guys.
Let me stop screen sharing for a second. And chew on the screen. Hey, nice to see you, Sean. Am I
Thanks. Hi,
pronouncing your
guys.
name?
I'm John.
Sean, yes. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, thanks everyone. Let's switch over to the next topic, which is Interop.
Hello. Hi, guys. So I guess first a little bit of the, okay, sharing is disabled. That's
I can give you sharing access, Arkady.
Sure.
Let me do that. So you can take over. And
if you can, Gansham, cover the things on the Etherpad as we go, that would be very helpful.
All right, do you have access now? Can you check?
Okay. It will stop other from sharing. Yes, governance, here we go. So first, a little bit kind of informational, maybe it's familiar for most of the people, but I'll do it anyhow. So the Interop working group was created about 6 years ago under the auspices of the of the foundation of the board itself. And that the goal of that is to provide the portability of the application across different implementation of the OpenStack. Be it the public cloud based upon OpenStack, private cloud, OpenStack, or anywhere in between. So the way it's structured, we have a set of the guidelines which we publish every release. The guidelines cover the current release, 2 previous releases, and also will be used for the master as developing the new guidelines for next year. So it's covering about four releases and ensuring the portability across portability of application across those releases. The way it is administered is that we have a RefStack, adjoining RefStack project. And the RefStack project used in 3 ways. So first and foremost, it allows the people to run, to use that to run the guidelines tests against their cloud, and it will connect to the cloud, and there is set of instruction how to do it. And that will run all of the tests. It automatically negotiates the version of the APIs the cloud is supporting, so the tests are run properly. The second thing which this RefStack provides us, it provides the ability for the submitters of their results to the foundation for the review, so the logo can be granted. OpenStack logo can be granted to the cloud, be it again vendor of the public or private cloud. And the third piece of the puzzle is that allows anybody to submit their, the users, what are they running, what APIs are they using for themselves, so we can collect the data to see which are the APIs most commonly run right now. So that's kind of the machinery of the thing. We have what is called there is multiple RevStack provides multiple marketing logo programs. So there is a compute program which covers what used to be called the core of the OpenStack program. There is object storage, which you can just provide object storage and not the rest of the OpenStack, or the platform which combine the two together. Those are kind of the primary functionality. Over the years, we included additional add-on program, which are not required for every cloud. But if the cloud provide that functionality, we would like to be able to ensure that application which use it functionality is portable across the clouds. So we have 3 programs right now: the DNS for the designate, orchestration for the hit, and shared file system for Manila. And shared file system was introduced in the last release, and we are going through updates for the next release. So what is the request for the Manila working group? So as we are looking for the next set of the guidelines, we are basically looking for what are the changes we need to deal with. So the changes come into kind of 2 sets, 2 blocks of the changes. One is what are the new API changes happening, and then we kind of review the usage by the community and decide if it's appropriate to become for those to become required or not. So that's the first part. So I'm sharing the current guidelines for the shared file system, and any updated APIs or the APIs which we think should not be required for whatever reasons. We would like to get your feedback for that. And the second one is for each of the APIs which we are covering, we have the Tempest test covering those. In most of the cases, single Tempest test, but in many for other projects, there is actually multiple Tempest tests which cover that functionality. So any changes for the Tempest to cover that functionality, we would like to know so we can update the guidelines. And in some cases, to be specifically the case for resize the files or shrink the file system, we found out that while it is a functionality which you put as a required functionality, but as we were running the test through the RevStack, we found out that, for example, LVM does not support that functionality. So maybe it was premature of us to put those as a required functionality. And that's kind of the guidelines we are looking from you guys to tell us where what we should put as a required functionality and what are the things we should not. And the things which are common, which happen on this release or common, for the previous release, basically, as we define the guidelines, we mark the guidelines additionally as advisory. Those are the guidelines which we expect will come in the future. And so the cloud vendors are aware of that, and they can test their support for that functionality, and we can collect that before promoting those in the future guidelines as a required functionality. Any question, comments? There is a couple of other things which we we kind of changing how the program is run. To be fair, when we look at the guidelines covering the current guidelines for which we are developing that, two previous releases coverage, and we expect that it will also operate on the future release, because that will be what master will be done, and when we do various testing of the machinery, we need to ensure that it's working on that. One additional thing that in the past, all of the guidelines were approved and by the board of directors, but as we shifted from the OpenStack to Open Infrastructure Foundation, the instructions recommendation given to us by the board was that they don't want to deal with approving of the guidelines. It's not very productive use of the board time. So we are changing how we're planning to operate, and that's work the working group is working on right now. Conceptually, we are looking for only bring to the board for approval the changes in the process itself, but the new guidelines will be approved by the 4 bodies, the Interop working group, RefStack, who's running that, the foundation members who are administering the marketplace, and the TC community. That process update is in the pipeline. We are discussing that during the PTG, and we expect a bunch of patches to land on the process changes and then get presented to the board for the approval of how we're going to operate in the future. It does not impact the Manila or the shared file system testing coverage, just changes in the process, so you're aware of that. So floor back to you, if any of the changes for either the functionality or the Tempest which we need to consider.
Absolutely. No, thank you so much for stopping by, Arkady, and for giving us an introduction. And I mean, there's a lot of work that's happened in the Interop cycle, Interop group. And as Arkady mentioned, I mean, much of this was us putting a new guideline with 2020.11, where we introduced a bunch of tests. And between Vida, myself, Laurent, when we were chatting, we were thinking about solidifying around the existing guideline that we have, and taking it even to the next guideline that's going to be in maybe a month or two, and then thinking through the next guideline if we were as we see more submissions and such, if we have the room or the desire to add more tests to this. Right now, I think it covers what most users tend to do with shared file systems, which is create, delete, update, shrink, and extend them. So I mean, adding more feature functionality would get into the boundaries of like the optional features and things. So that's where our thoughts are around this right now.
Sounds good. It makes perfect sense, and I appreciate you working through that. And again, I mean, right now we seem to be do not have anything on the advisory section. So if there is something which you think will be worth highlighting for us for consideration for the future,
yes,
that will be welcome in addition.
So I mean, if I understand this right, we can't just make a new required test. We've got to first add it through the advisory and
That's
promote
correct.
it out in the next guideline. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
It basically, once we put an advisory, it gives opportunity for the vendors to run their clouds and provide us feedback of the feasibility of that. And also provides an opportunity to collect the data from the users in terms of how often that API is being used, and then go through the formal process of the weights and
makes sense.
Applicability before we do the promotion.
Okay, yeah, that's useful clarification for me. That's good to know. The other part of this was, I mean, we, like you mentioned, we flagged the share shrinking test, and that was a deficiency we were glad to find out, very early on, just as we shipped the guideline. So hopefully there are people that are running these tests are not going to get a test failure just because they're using a backend that doesn't support it. But internally, we are also looking at, we did have a spec out there which said, be able to call out specifically if a backend supports or does not support share shrinking. We just haven't been able to prioritize that with all the work that we're doing. So
Understand.
That's the update on that. And I was going to chat with Martin a little bit about this. So if we are currently testing everything, this whole thing, whether we're running tests on RefStack or, as we develop these guidelines and the tooling around it, we're testing everything with LVM. And that's great. It's just a nice reference, easy, lightweight reference driver. So we just know whether things are working fine. But if you wanted to get a wider gamut, we have an option of testing it with CephFS and with CephFS NFS if necessary. But even that's a free and open source first party driver. That's also pretty lightweight, can be deployed on a dev stack easily, without need for any extra hardware, etc. So we can take that route and even cover this share shrinking test that's currently being flagged even in our own CI.
Yeah, my expectation that most of the cloud vendors, will not use LVM in the production. It doesn't seem to be a reasonable, reasonable thing to use. But where I'm unclear if all of the kind of usual suspects, NFS, CephFS, NetApp, Dell, and various others are all, their drivers properly support that.
Mm-hmm.
So probably, maybe we should move that from the required to advisory and start collecting data from the vendors. I don't know if your third-party CI covers that test, so we can extract it out of that, or we need to go some other route to get that information.
Well, the third-party CI does cover the test, but we also give vendors an option to skip it. You can turn it off via Tempest, so it's not a very good situation, which is kind of how we're skipping it right now in the thing as well. I think in our own CI as well. So yeah, I mean that's a good point to consider if we want to move this test from the required section to the advisory. Has that been done before? Is that fine?
So again, since I took over the Interop working group, we never had that. I think there was a scenarios where the things were put in, but then moved to that before. But that was on the early stages, when everything was very, very, very hectic. And every release of every upstream release was it was tons of changes.
Yeah.
So that was happening. That's why the process which was set up at that time, they basically release the guidelines, but then give the vendors 3 months roughly to test that in their clouds before coming back and say if it's reasonable or not. But since we reached a certain level of the maturity, we are not doing this process of the 3 months for vendors to do stuff, but we're just releasing and then collecting the information. So I think it's up to us to define the updated process that we will be able to deprecate some of the not deprecate things, but move things from from the required to advisory based upon that. Again, that will have to go through the approval process.
Makes sense. And another option we have is also to reduce the cutoff score and factor this this test failure specifically inside it, such that if we have the weights adjusted in the right amount of ways, then we can make sure that the cutoff score is accounting just for this test being ignored.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. Awesome. So yeah, we have some thinking to do around that line then. And if we do change our minds around, if there is going to be some tests that we want to add in the 20, I think it's pretty late to get something new in the next advisory. So we'll focus on the futures, I think, for
that makes sense. makes perfect sense.
Awesome. And just before this, I think earlier today we had a session on enhancing manila-tempest plugin, and we have some plans to do the to remove the admin requirements, but I don't want to make promises until we get that part figured out.
That will make you know, the RefStack guys' life substantially easier.
Yeah, makes sense.
Perfect.
Awesome.
I appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you very much, Gotham.
Thanks.
Thank you very
Thanks
much,
for stopping.
everybody.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. For the rest of you, we can move on to the next topic, which is share server migration enhancements. But we'll take a 5-minute break, if that's fine, before we do that.
Sounds okay.
Works. All right. 5-minute break, everyone. Thanks. Hello again. Welcome back, everyone. Let me just click recording again if you're not yet. Okay, we are. We're good. All right. So we're going to chat about share server migration enhancements with Carlos. And Carlos, okay, you're going to use the same Etherpad?
Yep, it's just the same Interpret.
Okay.
I just have some points I need to bring up, and
Yeah.
I think this won't create a mess on this Interpret, so that's okay.
No issues at all. No, thanks. And the floor is yours.
Right, thank you. So basically, we have share server migration. We have had share server migration implemented during the Victoria release, and basically the share server migration allows us in a GHSS true environment to move a share server from one cluster to another. And then in this way, like if we need to evacuate one cluster or something like that, we wouldn't need to move share by share. We can just move entire share servers, and that makes administrators' life easier. And then we have implemented this functionality during the Victoria release, and there were 2 drivers who received such functionality. The first of them is the container driver, which is a first-party driver. Use it to test some stuff. And the other one was the Interop driver, where we have implemented that as well. And the feature has been up for like 1 cycle since the Victoria was released. And then now we want to discuss like some enhancements for this functionality. These are going to be like mostly in the part of the change, or the changes we want to propose. There are going to be like Interop driver changes. Most of it won't touch the core part of Manila. And I just want to basically the part I want to discuss the most is the part that touches Manila, because like in the Interop driver right now, we use like an alternative approach, which is not like done exactly to like migrate a share. I would say it's like a workaround to migrate a share server, and then we use this kind of workaround, and in this way we do the share server migration today. We basically create a new share server in the destination cluster, and we kind of quote replicate quote, and then we just promote the replicated share server. But now we want to use another mechanism from the Interop backend, which is basically migrating the share servers in a native way. So for that, like it's going to be like better for us, because in this new aspect of migration, we could like avoid doing some stuff that are kind of unnecessary, and it would like make migration like more readable and simpler, and possibly we would reach some stuff like it would make the migration non-disruptive. So that's kind of a big step for us, because like the migration nowadays is considered to be like disruptive at some point, depending on the scenario. So that would help us to have a non-disruptive scenario, and in the new migration, it would be like non-disruptive, because it's like a mechanism, and the Interop driver would handle all the way, and it would even reuse the IPs that are allocated for the shared servers, and there wouldn't be like the need to allocate new IPs for shared servers as we do today. So basically, this is the part where we would need to do some changes around like Manila, because currently we allocate a new IP for the new shared server that must be created, and then we have like the source shared server and the destination shared server, and then when the migration gets completed, we just say migration complete, and then we kind of make the destination shared server like active, and that will happen as well. Like we would still like to have a destination shared server, but the Interop driver would be able to manage the migration better, and we wouldn't want to allocate a new IP address. So we would like need a way to avoid allocating this new IP address in the Manila core part. And we wanted to achieve that by like having a way of drivers reporting if they do want to allocate a new IP address or not. So we would be modifying both the check interface and the, I guess, the migration start interfaces. And there we would say like, oh, I need a new IP to be allocated, or I don't need a new IP to be allocated. So that is the only modification we would need to do in the Manila side, since we would be getting a response from the Interop backend, and in this response we would be having like this answer like, should we allocate a new IP or should we not allocate a new IP? And then that's basically, so we would like add some controls to the code, and then do some actions based on this output. So yeah, we wanted to bring this up to kind of discuss it, and it helps other drivers as well. Like if they do support like migrating shared servers across clusters, and if they have such mechanism, they should just say like, hey, I don't want to allocate a new IP address because I can handle everything like naturally, and stuff is going to be like pretty straightforward. So that's basically it. And the first question I would ask is if you guys have any concern with that, and if it's kind of clear the changes we want to introduce. And the second one is like, would this require like a specification or a light specification if that's the case?
So I can answer at least some of that with another question, I guess. So we discussed part of this, I think, when you all proposed the shared server migration initially, and your initial spec had had controls to say there is a non-disruptive migration that's possible. And I think we went back and forth at that time and said shared server migrations cannot be non-disruptive. We will have to be a disruptive because there's going to be some network changes involved, possibly. And that's still the case if somebody wants to go from share network A to share network B, right? Even with that, I mean, you will still have the disruptive aspect because you will have to take new network allocations into account because they come from a totally different network.
Yeah. So yeah, it would be like disruptive in case we are switching share networks, but in case we are not switching share networks, I guess it wouldn't be disruptive because we could like reuse the same IP address, and then the switchover phase we could just like bring the other shared server up, and like we wouldn't cause any problems with regards to like disruption, you know.
Okay. Yeah, so this makes makes sense as a logical progression for that feature, because at that time when you were writing the spec, or when we were discussing the previous spec, we said, right now we are not looking at non-destructive. You're only looking at migrations that involve a network change, even if going from even if preserving the same share network, but you're going across backends, you will still need to have a network, a new network allocation. So it's always going to be disruptive. So my concern, I think, then is, if you wanted to expose the non-destructive part, why would it be a hidden driver functionality? Because even with a driver that can do non-destructive migrations, you're saying when you're going across networks, it's always going to be disruptive. So wouldn't we provide that switch directly from the API, right? Isn't that the case? Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to try to conserve bandwidth and turn off my video. But
right.
Yep, I can clarify that question if you want.
Yeah, please.
So so pretty much this. So if for share migration today, you have a way to do non-disruptive migrations by just saying non-disruptive true in the API. So wouldn't we have a similar approach where, let's say, if you have a new share network ID, and you can skip that flag, but if you don't have a new share network ID, and you could actually ask for the driver to perform a non-destructive migration if it's possible.
Yeah.
And so that would be an API change that adds a new flag that says non-destructive, and then your driver can then just figure out, okay, can I do this? I'm going to check on my backend. Maybe the share network's not being changed, so I might be able to do this. I'll perform some checks. I'll return if this is possible to be non-destructive. And then if it's possible to be non-destructive, when we're doing the migration start, you can skip the whole neutron network allocation phase entirely.
Yep.
Does that make sense? Or? Yep.
Yeah, it makes sense. And we do have the check API for the share server migration. And if someone just performs like a check for migration share server, the driver would already respond, like if such migration, like if someone says like, oh, I want this to be non-disruptive, but I want to change your network, we would already be able to answer if like such migration, if such parameters is possible to be done. So in that, I mean, I guess I don't recall the migration start code entirely right now, but I guess we wouldn't be failing at the share API if we do not satisfy this kind of stuff. Like I specified a non-disruptive migration and I switch share network, but the driver itself would deny in the share manager level, so the operation would be blocked immediately. So
yeah, so still makes sense. So technically, what I'm asking for then is perhaps a UX, a better UX than hiding this from the API. Let's introduce this as an API option, so that an administrator, just like they do a share migration, can claim that they want a non-destructive migration, and maybe they do this all the time. And we can validate right in the API layer if the non-destructive migration is requested, but the share network's being changed. Then we know it's not going to be a non-destructive migration, so we'll deny that. But then if the share network's not being altered and they're requesting a non-destructive migration, we go back and check in the share manager layer if the driver can perform it. If it can perform it, we just skip the neutron setup bits. So it seems like a much simpler change in my head if we have this UX. That way you don't have to document. I mean, I think it simplifies your documentation and training aspects of how does somebody use this feature, because it feels otherwise something that can happen on some clouds can't happen on some clouds, and the administrator needs to know what's the possibilities here.
Yep. Sounds great. All right. So these are basically the changes we got to do, and yeah, I don't know if like do you guys would like to see a spec or a light specification, because they seem kind of simple, but someone might want to see something like that.
I don't have a preference, and I don't think, I mean, in my head, it's still very simple as of now. That all you're saying is we don't need no new network allocations if it's a non-destructive migration. It feels like a new capability that somebody can, add on the side. So I don't see, and all that's exposed to the administrator via this API is just this new API parameter, if you choose to implement it this way. So I don't think a spec would be that very useful or something. But I mean, does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Weeks ago, we were discussing about that, and we were discussing if at the moment that we are creating a trust server, if we need to ask the driver again if he is capable of doing that. And based on these comments, I think that an idea is to call the share server migration create. At the moment that we create a new share server and provided the information that it's a non-disruptive operation, and then we can just consider that the driver itself will not need to allocate a new IP address or new IP addresses, and we can skip another driver call at this moment. So this is an option, but weeks ago I was thinking at the share server create operation, if we need to ask the driver if he's going to use or not the same IP address. But this is a totally implementation decision. I think that we can turn this simple and just provide at the share manager layer the information that is non-disruptive operation. We don't need to allocate new IPs. We just need to update the network allocations table in order to have that this IP pointing to the new share server, maybe at this moment or at the complete moment. This is implementation detail, but that were my thoughts on that at that moment.
Yeah, makes sense. I haven't been in that code path recently. Both of you have, but what you're saying makes sense to me. Like, in the sense, it seems simple enough to say, yeah, sure, we're setting up a new server and we're creating new network allocations, but so far we have not skipped this network allocations piece. But should non-disruptive be there, we just avoid calling that piece, and everything else is the same. We still create a new share server. We still create the network allocations in the Manila database, and everything else remains the same.
Yeah, I think that I agree that we don't need the light spec for that, just for that. Just in case you guys think on any other new operation from the share server migration side, but if the only thing to be changed in the core code is the network allocation and this part of to validate the different share network ID and the non-disruptive parameter, I think that I'm okay with not having any spec or light spec.
Okay, good. Anything else on this topic then?
I would say nothing from my side. So but we are completely open to other folks that want to join on these and should talk more about this stuff with us.
Yeah, I think this is a good change. I mean, I like that, back when we were discussing that it had no, we didn't need to think about non-destructive, but layering non-destructive on top of it is not that much of a change. it's exactly what we did with shared migration. Initially, we didn't think there were going to be non-disruptive shared migrations possible, but we brought that in a different release as an API change. So I like this logical progression to this. Please do micro version that API. It's although it's experimental, if there are users relying on certain behavior, it makes sense to micro version it. And no other concerns besides that that I can think of. All right, so we're making good time then. So we're at the end of all the topics in this room. We are going to take up a related topic in the OpenStack SDK room, along with folks over there. So if you're interested, please do join us in the Grizzly room. The link's on the Etherpad for that. But otherwise, this has been a great day full of amazing discussions. We started with the manila-tempest plugin changes that are coming. We didn't go all the way through the discussions. We're going to bring that up again during one of the weekly meetings. And we have lots of work that we've planned out for as far as service recovery and service polling is concerned. I think the request there is there's going to be a spec. Please do deliberate with us on the designs, and if you are interested to come help with that feature, I mean, help is most welcome. I'm sure there's going to be something we can learn from patterns elsewhere, whether in the OpenStack ecosystem or elsewhere in the other cloud distributed systems in the cloud. And we also spoke with the Interop working group. Chairman, I think, and he gave you an intro of what Interop does and stuff. Good to know. And we don't have major plans to overhaul anything that we've done in Interop so far. But it's good to know for what's coming in the next guideline and such. And we're finally wrapping up with share server migration. So all good stuff. So I'll see you folks tomorrow at 1400 UTC. We have another big day full of good topics. So if you have any concerns, comments on the existing topics we've spoken so far, feel free to add notes to the Etherpad. We'll share the recordings and the minutes from these at the end of the week.
Okay.
Good.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. See you in the Grizzly room if you want to join the OpenStack SDK talk.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you for the great session.
Thank you.